There are stars who push themselves relentlessly, never afraid of burning out, only of being left behind. In the brutal race of the entertainment industry, sleep is often the first sacrifice. It isn't just a single restless night or even a few draining weeks. It's tens of thousands of mornings rising with bodies that were never truly restored. Their minds stay stretched tight like guitar strings, their hearts beating with the urgency of war drums. 11 Black celebrities have lived in this relentless rhythm for more than 20 years. And the stories I'm about to share reveal the price of that life. For the sake of their craft and the pursuit of greatness, these stars have traded comfort for glory, paying with countless nights where sleep was little more than a distant memory. Mariah Carey. 2 decades of restless nights long after the spotlight faded. Mariah Carey is a pop music icon, blessed with a once-in-a-generation voice, countless chart-topping hits, and an influence that has stretched across decades. But when the roaring crowds disappeared and the blazing stage lights dimmed, Mariah Carey didn't drift into peaceful sleep the way many imagined. Her body stayed tight, her mind racing, her heart still pounding. The rush of the stage refused to fade, even after her head touched the pillow. In the early years of her success, Mariah believed it was simply leftover adrenaline from electrifying performances, belting impossible notes to arenas full of people. The thunder of applause seemed to echo inside her chest long after the music stopped, making the excitement impossible to shake. Back in her room, the world around her fell silent. But inside her, the noise never stopped. She would close her eyes, only for them to snap open again in the darkness, watching the hours crawl slowly across the night. That pattern repeated for 23 years. Night after night, Mariah was essentially awake until dawn, whether at home or in unfamiliar hotel rooms. The ceiling slowly became more familiar than the bed beneath her. Her body felt drained, but her mind refused to power down. Thoughts stacked on top of thoughts, blurred, tangled, irrational, endless. Most nights she wouldn't drift off until around 4 or 5 in the morning, when pure exhaustion finally forced her eyes shut. And even then, 1 or 2 hours later, she would wake again. Sleep, for her, came only in short, broken fragments, never long enough for true recovery. There were periods when she went 2 or even 3 straight days without sleep, fueled by a flood of ideas and the crushing pressure of constant work. Songs like Baby Doll or Cry Baby carried quiet traces of those sleepless nights. What few people realized was that the emotions in those songs were not fictional. They reflected her real condition, the fragility, the irritability, the emotional volatility born from overwhelming fatigue. But Mariah convinced herself it was simply the price of being a creative mind overflowing with energy. It wasn't until January 26, 2001, after collapsing from extreme sleep deprivation, that doctors finally conducted a thorough evaluation. That was when she received a diagnosis, bipolar II disorder, a serious condition she initially chose to ignore. Rather than confronting it, she retreated inward, living in denial and isolation. Her schedule kept moving forward. The stage lights stayed bright. And sleep drifted even farther away. The insomnia soon intensified. During periods of mild mania, Mariah's energy surged beyond control. She worked relentlessly to burn it off, writing, recording, planning, without the need or even the desire to rest. Sleep began to feel like an obstacle rather than a necessity. Lying down only made her mind more restless, more uncomfortable. Some stretches kept her awake for as long as 4 consecutive days. After nights like that, the sharpness in her mind often came with irritability. Her emotional state grew increasingly sensitive. She developed a quiet fear of letting others down. Negative feelings magnified, causing stronger reactions to people around her. Meanwhile, her body remained trapped between 2 extremes, euphoria and exhaustion. More than 20 years passed this way. Not every night was completely sleepless, but deep, restorative sleep was rare. Her nervous system stayed stretched to its limits, while the fatigue remained hidden behind the glamorous smile the world saw. It wasn't until 2018 that Mariah finally spoke publicly about it. Admitting she lived with bipolar II disorder marked the moment she chose to face the problem directly. From there, proper treatment, including therapy and medication, began to calm the constant agitation and heavy emotional swings, allowing her body to slowly rediscover a natural rhythm. Deep sleep didn't return overnight, and recovery was far from perfect. But little by little, the nights became steadier. The endless staring contests with the ceiling began to fade. And with each passing night, her quality of life quietly started to return. Prince. Decades without real sleep, once staying awake 154 straight hours. Prince was more than a musician, he was a rare creative force. A singer, songwriter, producer, and perfectionist who controlled every step of the music-making process. The legacy he left behind became something the entire world could only stand back and admire. This was Paisley Park, Prince's empire. And while he was alive, it almost never slept. Day or night, blazing sun or silent darkness, the lights inside that complex stayed on. Prince would spend endless hours in the studio, machines humming, tape rolling, recording, editing, shaping sound with his own hands. His life had no fixed schedule. His biological clock meant nothing to him. Everyone who worked with Prince knew one thing: sleep was a luxury he rarely allowed himself. Some days he barely closed his eyes. 3 days without sleep wasn't unusual. That exhausting rhythm repeated for decades, quietly wearing down his body while fueling a creative energy that stunned everyone around him. Prince worked like a man racing against time. Song after song was born in the middle of the night. While everyone else dragged themselves through the room, heavy limbs, burning eyes, minds fogged from exhaustion, Prince kept moving. His thin fingers floated across the piano keys as if fatigue simply didn't exist. Ever since building Paisley Park on September 11, 1987, Prince lived with constant anxiety and severe stage fright. Every time he stepped in front of a massive crowd, the pressure surged through him, pushing his nervous system to its limits. To calm himself, he began relying on sedatives. But those drugs only made his fragile sleep even harder to control. Year after year, those broken nights piled up into a massive debt, one his heart and lungs would eventually have to pay. More than 30 years of serious sleep deprivation slowly eroded his body. Yet from the outside, nothing seemed to change. He still performed, still composed, still ran his musical empire with calm precision. But inside, his nervous system and circulatory system were straining under the weight of decades without rest. Then came April 21, 2016. Prince reached a level of overwork that shocked even those used to his relentless pace. 154 hours awake without sleep. More than 6 days. Nearly a full week. His body had been pushed into overload. At that point, the alertness he showed wasn't real strength. It was a mask hiding a system already deep in the red. Time began to blur. Reality and illusion mixed together. Headaches, dizziness, disorientation, circulation failing. Prince had always seemed able to endure sleep deprivation better than most. But endurance is not immortality. And those 6 sleepless days became the breaking point. His familiar office inside Paisley Park, once a place where creativity soared, had slowly turned into a cage, trapping him inside an endless cycle of work and exhaustion. Under the harsh studio lights, his worn-down body could no longer recover. Yet his mind still refused to stop. To push through the pain, he turned to Vicodin. What no one knew was that the pills he took weren't real Vicodin. They were counterfeit, laced with fentanyl, an extremely powerful opioid. The overdose, combined with a nervous system weakened by anxiety and decades without proper sleep, finally pushed his body beyond its limits. More than 30 years without a single night of true rest. And 154 hours awake at the end. Those numbers are not stories meant to glorify passion or dedication. They are a warning, a reminder that sometimes people understand the danger ahead and still keep walking toward the abyss. Shaquille O'Neal. Shaquille O'Neal, a giant whose body battled silent enemies for decades. Shaquille O'Neal is a basketball legend, one of the most dominant centers the game has ever seen. A multi-time champion. A global icon whose presence stretched far beyond the court and deep into pop culture. But behind that towering frame and that unmistakable laugh lived a struggle very few people ever talked about. When the arena lights faded, when the crowds emptied out and the noise of the game disappeared, the night brought a different kind of fight. For Shaq, the bed was another arena. And that battle lasted more than 20 years. But he wasn't fighting sleepless nights from stress or long practices. He was fighting something far more invisible, nights where he went to sleep, yet his body refused to rest. From the earliest years of his professional career, Shaq woke up almost every morning feeling drained. Through the night his body appeared asleep, but deep inside, something kept pulling him back to the surface again and again. His breathing would suddenly stop. Over and over, the brain was forced to wake just enough to survive. Deep sleep never had time to settle in. His body never fully relaxed. His mind never truly recharged. Sleep apnea followed him season after season. Night after night became the same relentless loop. Drift into sleep, breathing stops. The brain jolts awake, fall back into shallow sleep, then the cycle begins again. This could happen hundreds of times in a single night, often without the person even realizing it. Year after year, from the peak of his dominance to the final stretch of his career, broken sleep became a constant companion. More than 2 decades of nights without real rest eventually began to show their cost. And the damage revealed itself in daylight. Fatigue followed Shaq everywhere, clinging to him like a shadow. There were moments he would nod off unexpectedly. His mind often felt heavy. His reactions slowed. Dizziness appeared without warning. Yet that enormous body still stormed onto the court. Still absorbed brutal contact. Still exploded upward for thunderous dunks that shook entire arenas. But behind those powerful moments was a body quietly running on empty. A professional athlete already pushes the limits of human endurance, grueling schedules, relentless travel, violent collisions night after night. And when sleep fails to provide real recovery, the wear and tear begins to accelerate, slowly grinding down the body from within. Shaq often hid that exhaustion behind booming laughter and unstoppable confidence. But inside, his body kept sending signals. Those daytime crashes weren't just the price of hard training. They were the echoes of thousands of fractured nights. Then in 2011, after more than 20 years of struggling sleep, everything finally came into focus. While hospitalized for an Achilles tendon injury that ultimately ended his career, doctors discovered the hidden cause. Sleep apnea. Suddenly, years of unexplained exhaustion made sense. Even though he had tried to live healthy, train hard, and maintain discipline, his body had been fighting a silent battle every night. With treatment came a simple but powerful solution, a breathing machine that kept his airways open while he slept. For the first time in more than 2 decades, Shaquille O'Neal experienced uninterrupted sleep. His body could finally enter real rest. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but the difference became undeniable. His energy improved. His focus sharpened. His mood steadied. The quality of life he had slowly lost began to return. For Shaq, it wasn't just about treating a medical condition. It was about reclaiming something that had been taken from him for most of his adult life. After retirement, Shaquille O'Neal began speaking openly about his experience. He shared his story to raise awareness about sleep health, especially in the Black community where sleep apnea is often overlooked or diagnosed far too late. Because sometimes the most dangerous battles aren't the ones fought in the spotlight. They're the silent ones that happen every night. Reggie White. Reggie White. A man who woke hundreds of times every single night. Reggie White was an American football legend, a dominant NFL defensive end, the terror of opposing offenses, and for years a living symbol of power on the field. People assumed a man who trained as hard as he did must sleep like a rock. But when Reggie White lay down at night, true rest never came. For him, the night wasn't recovery. It was a constant battle. From the outside, his massive body looked perfectly still. But inside, his organs were fighting chaos. Even while lying there, his breathing was heavy. His airway would collapse, blocking the flow of air. Oxygen stopped moving the way it should. Sometimes his lungs went without oxygen for up to 40 seconds. His brain reacted instantly and violently. It would jolt his body awake. His eyes might flick open for a moment, then close again before he even realized what happened, before he could remember waking at all. In medical terms, that still counts as an awakening. And it didn't happen just a few times a night. Every single night, Reggie White experienced more than 200 of these awakenings. More than 200 times ripped out of sleep. More than 200 moments where his brain panicked from lack of oxygen. Each pause in breathing triggered an emergency response. His heart rate surged. Blood vessels tightened. Oxygen was rushed to the most critical organs. Over and over again, night after night, this brutal cycle repeated itself hundreds of times. His sleep was completely shattered. There was no time for the body to repair itself. No deep sleep to calm the nervous system. No real recovery. So every morning, Reggie White woke up exhausted. Not the kind of exhaustion that comes from hard training. This was a heavy, dragging depletion that clung to every movement. And yet he still stepped onto the field looking unstoppable. He still crashed head-on into opponents. Still collided with other 100-kilogram bodies. His power on the field made people believe he was immune to fatigue. But the truth was the exact opposite. His body was fighting silent battles every single day. Days on the field. Nights in the bed. And his brain rarely reached deep sleep long enough to truly recover. Even while he slept, his cardiovascular system was under constant strain. His heart worked overtime as oxygen repeatedly disappeared from his bloodstream. His blood pressure surged and crashed again and again. The warning signs were there. Loud snoring. Chronic exhaustion. Daytime grogginess. Clear alarms. But he ignored them. For a professional athlete, feeling tired seemed normal. For a big man, snoring seemed harmless. He had no idea that night after night, his heart was slowly being worn down. This didn't happen suddenly. It followed Reggie White for years. Season after season, as he grew older, his body took longer to recover. The damage quietly accumulated until it finally erupted in the cruelest way possible. In 2004, at just 43 years old, Reggie White died from cardiac arrhythmia. A heart that had endured thousands of oxygen-starved nights could no longer keep going. Sean Combs. What began as a no-sleep philosophy slowly turned into a decades-long curse. Sean Diddy Combs rose as an entertainment mogul, powerful producer, entrepreneur, and the architect behind music and fashion empires that shaped the rhythm of an entire generation. In Combs' office, a phrase hung on the wall like a commandment: no sleep. It wasn't inspiration. It was the rule that fueled the relentless machine of his career from the very beginning. Combs often bragged about barely sleeping. 18 hours of work a day was the baseline. 3 hours of sleep felt like luxury. And that didn't even include the all-night parties and stimulants that kept the energy high. When exhaustion hit, he would steal 10-minute power naps just to patch himself together, calling it sleep, though it was really just closing his eyes, breathing for a moment, and jumping back into motion. Back then, that kind of sleep deprivation was praised as the badge of ambition. Stay awake longer. Work harder. Success comes faster. So Combs lived in constant pressure. His brain rarely slowed down. Ideas stacked on ideas. Deals on top of deals. Even when he lay down, his mind kept racing, thinking about the next contract, the next move, the next way to keep control of his empire. Sleep never arrived, because his mind left no room for it. And this routine didn't last just a few intense years. It stretched across more than 2 decades. From his youth into his 40s, Combs lived with extreme sleep deprivation. Many days ended with barely 3 hours of rest. Days powered by adrenaline and stress. Nights spent turning in bed while his thoughts refused to quiet down. But time eventually collected its price. After 25 years under the no-sleep mentality, the damage began to show. Long-term stress. Short temper. A nervous system that could no longer relax. 10-minute naps stopped working. 3 hours of sleep was no longer an advantage. It became a burden. What once looked like a competitive edge turned into a double-edged sword. Combs later called it both a gift and a curse. As he got older, his body demanded something real, not quick shut-eye, not half-conscious rest, but deep, continuous sleep that could calm his overworked mind. Yet once chronic insomnia takes hold, it doesn't release easily. It became a daily battle. He described his brain as an engine without brakes. He didn't know how to turn it off. His body felt exhausted, but his thoughts kept spinning. Lie down, no sleep. Sit up, still drained. So Combs began trying everything to reclaim his rest. Cutting back his schedule. Meditation. Relaxation practices. Structured sleep therapy programs. Anything that might pull him out of years of burnout. The first nights weren't easy. His mind, trained for decades to race, resisted the silence. The stillness felt unfamiliar. Without a packed schedule to cling to, emptiness crept in. But that uncomfortable quiet was exactly what he needed to break the sleepless cycle. And eventually, the methods began to work. When the spotlight finally dimmed a little, the words, "no sleep," stopped sounding like pride. They revealed themselves for what they had always been, a dangerous myth. Because when success demands the sacrifice of sleep, the victory often comes with a hidden cost. Rick Ross. Rick Ross. For decades, he survived on less than 3 hours of sleep a night. Rick Ross isn't just another rapper. He's one of the heaviest hitters in American hip-hop, a studio powerhouse behind countless hits and a sprawling music empire where money, power, and relentless momentum move together at full speed. His life runs in a world most people can't even imagine. For Rick Ross, night was never meant for rest. Night simply stretched the day longer, a blur of studio sessions, parties, business meetings, and late-night feasts stacked back to back. When his career exploded in the early 2000s, his sleep began to disappear. 3 hours a night became the norm, sometimes even less. There were stretches when he barely slept at all, just brief moments of unconsciousness between flights, or quick dozes in the leather seats of tour buses speeding through the dark. His schedule drifted completely out of sync with his body's natural rhythm. 2, 3 in the morning wasn't bedtime. It was dinner. Heavy, greasy meals would hit the table, thick T-bone steaks dripping with oil, devoured fast while his stomach struggled to keep up and his heart kept racing. Sleep would come later, but it was shallow, fragile, easily broken. Years passed like this. Eventually, sleep deprivation stopped feeling like a problem. It became the foundation of his life. Ross would wake after barely 1 or 2 hours, head pounding, eyes burning red, his body begging for more rest. But the day was already waiting. Studios were booked. Business partners were calling. Planes were scheduled to leave. So he got up anyway, pushing past the warnings his body kept sending. The lack of sleep began to take its toll. Heavy fatigue, slower reflexes, sudden memory lapses. The line between alert and exhausted grew thinner every day, like walking a tightrope with nothing below but collapse. Then in 2011, the consequences finally caught up with him. During a single day, Rick Ross suffered 2 seizures back-to-back while on a flight. Thousands of feet in the air, trapped inside a pressurized cabin, his exhausted body simply shut down. His brain had reached its limit after days of almost no sleep. Doctors later confirmed the trigger: severe sleep deprivation. It was the result of decades spent living against the body's natural rhythm, sacrificing rest for work, fame, and a non-stop lifestyle. That moment forced Rick Ross to confront a reality he had ignored for years. He began changing his life. He lost weight, cleaned up his diet, cut back on the heavy late-night meals. But fixing sleep proved much harder than losing pounds. Even when he tried going to bed early, his body would jolt awake after 2 or 3 hours, as if permanently stuck in survival mode. The smallest sound could snap him out of sleep. Recovery came slowly. After nearly a decade of effort, his body finally began to adjust. By 2016, Ross was able to sleep around 6 hours a day, not always in one full stretch, but enough to keep his body from shutting down again. Without that terrifying moment in 2011, the sleepless grind might have continued for decades, until his body collapsed without warning. Because every sleepless night adds a little more debt. And 10 years without rest creates a mountain of it. Rick Ross' body had incredible endurance. But endurance doesn't erase damage. The difference is, he changed before the bill became impossible to pay. Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson. 60 days without true deep brain sleep. Michael Jackson was a global music icon, an artist who shattered sales records, redefined stage performance and dance for the world, and turned every appearance into a cultural moment few performers ever reach. But behind the spotlight, something far darker was unfolding. From the mid-1980s, at the very peak of his fame, Michael Jackson's brain entered a state that almost never truly rested. In 1985, during the creation of We Are the World, his schedule stretched to extremes, sometimes nearly 20 hours a day, and that was only the officially recorded work time. Days were spent in the studio or on stage. Nights were filled with relentless thoughts about melodies, choreography, rhythms, and ideas. When he finally lay down, his body was exhausted, but his mind kept racing like a machine with no off switch. Sleep came only in short, scattered fragments. Unofficial work hours sometimes stretched to 23 or even 24 hours straight. By the 1990s, the insomnia had worsened dramatically. World tours ran back to back, flipping his body clock upside down. Time zones shifted constantly, and his body could never fully adjust. Even after the stage lights faded, his system was still moving to the rhythm of the performance. The silence after a show only made the noise inside his head louder. Some nights, Michael would lie awake for hours in a dark room, eyes wide open, watching the clock tick slowly. His body desperately wanted sleep, but it simply wouldn't come. Childhood trauma, the crushing pressure of fame, and the fear of losing his place at the top built a constant layer of stress. For more than 2 decades, Michael tried many healthy ways to reclaim natural sleep. None of them worked. Eventually, sedatives appeared, first as a temporary lifeline. The doses started small. But the body adapts. The effects faded. The doses increased. And a dangerous cycle began. The sleepless nights kept returning as tolerance built. Worse still, deep sleep became rare, and REM sleep, the stage where the brain repairs itself, almost disappeared. By the early 2000s, the situation was spiraling out of control. During the day, Michael often drifted into brief mental fog, but at night he lay awake, staring into darkness. At times he went 5 straight days without sleep, even while taking medication. A lack of REM sleep slowly damages the brain, affecting memory, emotional stability, and neural recovery. Then came 2009. As Michael prepared for the massive This Is It comeback, the pressure intensified. Grueling rehearsals combined with years of sleep deprivation pushed his body into a constant state of alarm. The exhaustion was no longer just physical, it had reached deep into his nervous system. At that point, propofol was introduced as a final attempt to force rest. But propofol is not natural sleep. The body may appear still, but the brain skips the essential REM phase where repair happens. It's more like switching off the power to a system without allowing it to heal. Sleep expert Dr. Charles Cheesler later confirmed that Michael Jackson had become an extremely rare case, nearly 60 consecutive days without true REM sleep. The deficit severely weakened his nervous system. And even without the tragic overdose incident on June 25, 2009, such a prolonged collapse of natural sleep would likely have pushed his body toward failure sooner or later. Whoopi Goldberg. Whoopi Goldberg. For decades, she lived on just 3 hours of sleep a night. Few artists have reached every major peak in American entertainment the way Whoopi has. Film, television, the stage, her career stretches across them all, backed by an award shelf the industry can't ignore. Some people lose sleep because they fear the dark. Others because anxiety won't let their minds rest. For Whoopi Goldberg, sleep simply stopped being necessary. Beginning in the late 1970s, as her career began to rise, she slipped into an unusual rhythm. Night was no longer a time for rest. Night became the quiet space where her mind could explode with creativity. 3 hours of sleep, sometimes less, night after night. By the 1980s, her schedule grew even more intense. Film sets, theater stages, television studios, one after another, lights always on. While the world slept, Whoopi stayed awake, fully alert, diving into relentless work. What started as a habit slowly became part of her identity. She never tried to hide it. In fact, she admitted she loved being awake. Those silent hours when the world went still and her mind could roam freely. For most people, insomnia is an enemy. For Whoopi, it felt more like a dangerous companion, one that could betray her at any moment. Still, she learned to function through years of sleep deprivation. She liked the feeling that her days were longer, that she could accomplish more. In a way, she seemed to push past the body's natural demand for rest. But the body always keeps score. At first the toll was subtle, mornings clouded by a strange, unnamed grogginess. By the 1990s, the fatigue became harder to ignore. Unstable focus, a heavy head, exhaustion that crept in during the day. Later, doctors confirmed the cause: sleep apnea. Short, repeated interruptions in breathing during the night made her already limited sleep even more fragmented. More than 2 decades of restless nights had quietly placed pressure on her heart and brain. Whoopi knew it. But instead of changing everything, she simply accepted it as part of the life she had chosen. Ironically, her greatest fear wasn't insomnia. It was sleeping pills. After struggling with addiction earlier in life, she refused anything that could create dependency. For many people, medication offered an escape from sleepless nights. For Whoopi, it felt like stepping onto dangerous ground. So for decades, she lived with insomnia, no pills, no chemical escape. By the early 2000s, as the strain on her body became harder to ignore, she began searching for gentler solutions: lifestyle changes, breathing exercises, quitting smoking to improve her lungs, and nighttime breathing. Each adjustment was a small attempt to protect her health. But even today, long, deep, uninterrupted sleep remains something of a luxury in Whoopi Goldberg's life. Samuel L. Jackson. Samuel L. Jackson. 10 relentless years without real sleep, until his nervous system finally began to break. Today he stands as one of the most enduring forces in American cinema, a global box office icon with a towering catalog of unforgettable roles. But there was a long stretch in Jackson's life when true sleep almost disappeared. Not just a few restless nights. Not even a few months of a broken rhythm. An entire decade where his brain was forced to stay awake, trapped in constant stimulation. The 1980s arrived with ambition and hunger for breakthrough, but they also pulled him into chaotic days and endless nights. Alcohol and drugs slowly crept into his routines, warping his natural sleep cycle beyond recognition. When the body should have drifted into rest, his mind was pushed to stay alert. When he desperately needed recovery, his nerves were stretched tight. The blackouts from alcohol weren't sleep. They were crude shutdowns, flipping the brain off without repairing the damage underneath. So Jackson lived in a strange half-state, half awake, half drifting. Days felt heavy and sluggish. Reflexes slowed. His mind sat inside a thick fog. Nights were worse. Waves of stimulation sent his heart racing, sweat pouring, eyes wide open as dawn crept closer. Even when sleep came, it was too shallow to heal the brain. The more exhausted he became, the more he craved another high. A closed loop that trapped him for nearly 10 years. By the late 1980s, the warning signs were impossible to ignore. His nervous system was cracking under pressure. Memory began to slip. Moods swung violently. Focus shattered again and again. Some days he couldn't even separate yesterday from today. The mental haze began threatening his career itself. Then, in the early 1990s, he made a decision that would change everything. Quitting wasn't just about escaping alcohol or drugs. For Jackson, it was a battle to reclaim something far more basic: natural sleep. But sobriety didn't immediately fix the damage. His brain, conditioned for constant stimulation, rebelled when the chaos stopped. Nights were still restless. Sleep arrived late, thin, fragile, easy to break. Still, he stayed patient. In the years that followed, Samuel L. Jackson rebuilt his life with strict discipline. Fixed schedules. Rest treated with the same importance as work. No more sleepless nights just to prove something. He learned to stop before exhaustion took control. Gradually, real sleep returned, deep enough for the brain to repair itself. The REM cycles that had once vanished slowly came back. And as the 1990s moved forward into the 2000s, something remarkable happened. His career exploded. The roles multiplied. The schedules filled. But this time, he refused to sacrifice himself. Work piled up, Yet he protected sleep like a vital asset. Maybe that hard-won return to deep, stable rest sharpened his acting. Maybe it preserved the memory, the energy, the relentless focus that kept Samuel L. Jackson dominating the screen for more than 30 years after. Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey. Decades of restless nights built the empire the world sees today. Oprah Winfrey is a global media icon, the architect of a far-reaching empire that reshaped how millions connect with stories, emotions, and the power of a personal voice. But few people realize that behind that success were long stretches of life when sleep stopped behaving the way it should. It was shortened, delayed, and sacrificed again and again in the pursuit of progress. Deadlines, broadcast schedules, decisions that had to be flawless. Oprah often went to bed late and rose early, training her mind to be ready the moment the day began. At first, the pressure was manageable. Back then she could still manage roughly 6 hours of sleep a night. But as her influence grew and the demands multiplied, the line between day and night slowly disappeared. Meetings stacked up. Ideas arrived constantly. Every decision affected hundreds of people. Soon, nights with only 3 or 4 hours of sleep became routine. The sleep she lost was rarely recovered. And as Oprah entered perimenopause, the struggle shifted from shortened sleep to something far more difficult. For nearly 2 years, beginning in her late 40s, her body would feel completely exhausted at night, yet her mind refused to power down. Her heart would suddenly race. Her breathing turned shallow and uneven. Heat waves flashed through her body. Sleep would arrive for a moment, then vanish just minutes later. Some nights passed without sleep at all, leaving her suspended in a strange half-awake state. At the time, Oprah didn't suspect hormones. The symptoms felt more like a heart problem. Lingering stress and anxiety only heightened her brain's sense of alertness. The more alert she became, the farther sleep drifted away. Even with top medical experts searching for answers, identifying the real cause took time. Meanwhile, the pace of her life never slowed. Cameras rolled. Decisions had to be made. The pressure of leadership left little room for physical collapse. Night after night, she pushed through exhaustion, drifting deeper into a cycle of long, pale, sleepless nights. Eventually, specialists began connecting the symptoms to hormonal changes. That discovery finally pointed toward a path forward. But recovery wasn't instant. Oprah had to relearn how to listen to her body. She began treating sleep not as something expendable, but as a strategic priority essential to clarity and endurance. Carefully managed hormone therapies were introduced, gradually helping her stabilize a rhythm that had been disrupted for years. She also reshaped the structure of her life. Sundays became protected time for recovery. No filming, no meetings, no constant mental churn. Sleep slowly reclaimed its place as the foundation of long-term focus and resilience. After nearly 3 years of deliberate change, fuller nights began to return. Today, Oprah still doesn't experience perfect sleep. But she now sleeps enough for her nervous system to rest, recover, and sustain the energy required to lead the life she built. Dwayne Johnson. Dwayne Johnson. The man who lived for decades on barely any sleep, driven by relentless discipline. Dwayne Johnson is a wrestling legend who rose to become a global movie superstar. He stands as a symbol of iron will, relentless endurance, and one of Hollywood's highest-earning icons. Under the blazing lights of film sets, people see his towering physique, his charismatic smile, the non-stop schedule, and the energy that seems impossible to drain. But behind that image lies decades of deliberate sleep deprivation. It began during his years as a professional wrestler, grinding endlessly on the mat. Between brutal training sessions and constant travel, Johnson developed an unusual habit. Long before sunrise, while the city was still deep in sleep, he would rise. The clock almost always read 3:30, rarely as late as 4 a.m. His body felt heavy, but his mind had to snap into focus. Night after night, his sleep shrank to barely 3 or 4 hours. At first, it was simply a way to survive a punishing schedule. Over time, it hardened into a life philosophy. Johnson began to see the hours before dawn as sacred time. No phone calls. No matches. No demands. No pressure from the outside world. In that quiet darkness, he trained, planned, and took control of his day before anyone else had even opened their eyes. Years went by, and the habit didn't fade when wrestling ended and Hollywood began. If anything, it grew even deeper. Film schedules filled every corner of his calendar. The gym opened before dawn. Meetings stacked one after another. Nights ended late, mornings began early. His body was constantly stretched between exhausting days, rarely given the chance to fully recover. There were weeks when he worked intensely every single day while surviving on only a few hours of sleep. Rest came quickly and disappeared just as fast. For more than 20 years, Johnson's biological clock was pushed far beyond its natural limits. Waking up in complete darkness became routine. So did the dull headache, the slightly uneven heartbeat, the quiet fatigue lingering in the background. Yet every morning he rose like a machine programmed for discipline. To many, it looks like admirable dedication. Few stop to consider the cost behind it. Years of chronic sleep deprivation do more than exhaust the brain. They slowly strain the body's internal systems. Hormones become unstable. Testosterone levels drop. Muscle recovery slows. Even Johnson has admitted it. He has spoken openly about his irregular sleep patterns and the lingering sluggishness they leave behind. Some days his mind needs more time to focus, to calculate, to plan. But the habit has become part of who he is, something he refuses to abandon. For decades, sleep has never been Dwayne Johnson's highest priority, and it likely never will be. It always stands behind work, ambition, and the drive to stay at the top. When success arrives, the price paid in silence often fades into the background. Sleep deprivation helped build his empire, but it has also carved invisible scars across his body, scars the public rarely sees. If you know other stars who struggle with similar insomnia or sleep issues, share their stories in the comments below. And if you want to uncover more hidden truths behind the glamour of fame, don't forget to subscribe to the Black Icons Uncovered channel and turn on notifications. There are still countless untold stories in the entertainment world, and we'll continue revealing them in the videos ahead.